1944. The Führer's state of health grows worse every day. A heavy dizziness making him swoon from time to time forces him to keep to the bed. His doctors, Karl Brandt and Hans Hasselbach, blame their colleague Morell for Hitler's dreadful condition on the grounds of the huge amount of strychnine he has been taking of late. But the Nazi leader is not willing to give up the stimulants and sedatives that Morell is supplying and orders the rest of the doctors to be discharged at once. Himmler sends him his personal doctor, the SS Colonel Ludwig Stumpfegger, with the impossible mission of improving the Führer's health. A few weeks later, Hitler is already able to attend the daily meetings, although he can hardly stand on his feet, and the tremor in his left hand has grown even worse. Mayor Bernd Freitag von Lorenhoven has been General Heinz Guderian's assistant when the latter was chief of the Land Forces High Staff and had the chance to attend the meetings in the operations center. He was to declare some years later, "I was shocked to behold a 55-year-old stooping old-timer with no expression in his eyes and relying only on some miraculous new weapon to win the war." The Allied advance on the Western Front is almost paralyzed by the heavy November rain, which has caused rivers to overflow their banks and flood roads. The British have forced the Germans back to the River Meuse, and to the south of the Ardennes, General Patton and his troops have crossed the Moselle River and reached the German border at the Siegfried Line. French troops have captured Belfort and taken up positions to the north of Basel, near the Rhine. The Allied General Staff has decided to launch an offensive in the north, from Aachen in the south, through Alsace, weakening the central positions in the sector of the Ardennes, where only 4 U.S. divisions are left to defend a front of more than 120 kilometers. Both Eisenhower and Montgomery know the risks, but they believe they are worth taking, given the weakness of the German army. Hitler is like a caged beast in the face of the Allied advance. Distanced from events, he dreams of regaining the initiative and thinks he has the capacity to carry out a great counteroffensive. He is clearly not in touch with reality, and in his delirious desire for greatness, he has prepared a plan that invites disaster. Most of the German officers are sick and tired of so many years of war and believe the honorable way out would be to negotiate a peace deal that allows them to save their country. The Führer, however, convinced he can still stop the enemy, is willing to use up the final reserves of men and material. "They think we are finished, but I will show them otherwise," he says. In the case of failure, it will be time for the last act of this long, irrational tragedy. Together with General Jodl, he has come up with a strategy called Alert on the Rhine, involving a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes region. His troops are to reach the River Meuse, and afterwards advance on Antwerp through a corridor that the panzer divisions will hold open after dividing the Allied armies. It is a rerun of the attack carried out in 1940, when his forces rapidly crossed the area. It is to be a new lightning war, but in this case with less men. Weakened after 4 years fighting, and facing a greatly superior enemy. Most of his generals think the plan is far too ambitious, though no one dares to question the perturbed Führer's authority. He thinks he can break up the coalition against him of the Western countries with Stalin. The tension between them will lead to rupture. Then we will make peace with the West, and the communist hordes will get their just desserts, he tells his general staff. From a purely military perspective, Hitler's plan makes sense, as the Allies' weak point is the Ardennes. But the Third Reich's military potential is very different from what he imagines it to be. For his aides, it means playing the last card, the final reserves that will be essential for the defense of the German homeland. Both von Rundstedt and Model unsuccessfully tried to convince the Nazi leader of the need to consider other alternatives. But he is obstinate, if not to say deranged. Poring over military maps, his fantasies grow, while Goebbels and his propaganda machine call for a general mobilization against the enemy. In October, the movement of units to points east of the Ardennes begins under a veil of secrecy. 25 divisions and 250,000 men advance westwards. Despite receiving reports that Hitler is preparing a large-scale offensive, the Allied intelligence services do not take them seriously because they believe the Germans are on their last legs. To the north of the Ardennes, in the western approaches to Germany, Montgomery has 16 divisions. To the south of the forest, there are another 3 under General Patton, preparing to invade the Belgian Saar area in mid-December. Hitler moves to the Eagle's Nest, close to Frankfurt, to follow developments. Aged, isolated, and suffering from Parkinson's, at 56 he looks like an old man, dragging his feet as he walks. There will never be a capitulation, never. The enemy must be made to understand, he exclaims over and over again. December 16th. On the night of the 15th and the morning of the 16th, a devastating German artillery barrage and rocket attack lights up the skies of Belgium and Luxembourg. On a 100-kilometer front, from Monschau to Echternach, in freezing conditions and stormy weather that provide protection for the German forces, the roads fill up with armored columns and soldiers of the Reich. The thick snow does not stop the panzer divisions from concentrating their attack on the center of the Allied positions and opening a corridor 18 kilometers long through the U.S. 8th Army between the Belgian cities of Malmedy and Bastogne, surrounding the American troops in this city. Eisenhower, who is in Versailles taking care of some routine matters, is shocked to receive the news of the German attack. The first day of the battle is one of complete confusion. At a number of points, the Allies give ground or collapse in the face of the German push. Due to communications failures, the confusion grows and nobody really knows where the front of the counteroffensive is. In the thick rain and snow, panzers slip through the U.S. armored columns and subject them to heavy bombardments. "10,000 American soldiers of the Golden Lion Division find themselves surrounded suddenly, and their officers can see no way of escape. 7,000 of them surrender, the largest capitulation in U.S. military history after Bataan. German tactics put the nerves of the Allied troops on edge. English-speaking Germans carry out Operation Reich. Wearing American uniforms and driving jeeps, they infiltrate enemy positions to increase confusion and the breakup of the front. They are few in number and their acts are limited, but they produce an enormous psychological effect among the U.S. troops. The German advance has penetrated in a wedge shape from Manschau to Echternach, with its point in the vicinity of the Belgian city of Dinant. The 6th Panzer Division advances in the north under the command of SS General Sepp Dietrich. Von Manteuffel's 5th Army and Field Marshal Walter Model's 8th Army are in the center, and the 7th Army of General Brandenberger in the south. December 17th. Eisenhower is aware of the magnitude of the attack and sends 15,000 paratroopers to defend Bastogne and St. Vith. At midday, 3 units of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion are murdered in what will be known as the Malmedy Massacre. The initial success of the German offensive does not continue as Allied resistance, bad weather, and the first symptoms of a lack of resources begin to take their effect. This forces changes to the schedule set by Hitler for his troops reaching the River Meuse in 2 days. December the 20th. The Führer orders Operation Hosven. Airborne forces are parachuted into the area to the north of Malmedy in an attempt to increase the number of effectives marching on Antwerp, but they hardly have any effect on the development of the war. The Battle of the Bulge goes into its 5th day. The Allies try to regain the initiative, and Eisenhower orders Patton's Third Army to counterattack the German positions and break the encirclement around Bastogne. December 21st. The whole Ardennes area is covered in thick snow. The Germans have Bastogne in their grip, and the U.S. troops defending it are suffering more than 1,000 casualties a day. December 22nd. The Germans send an emissary to Bastogne with an ultimatum to surrender or face annihilation. General Anthony McAulife's response when he hears the demand is, "Us? Surrender? Aw, nuts." And nuts is the reply he sends to the Germans. Bastogne will not be surrendered. Meanwhile, Patton's advance columns reach the southern flank of the salient, but come up against the German 7th Army, which halts their advance. December 23rd. The day breaks clear and sunny, perfect for intervention from the Air Force. The soldiers defending Bastogne cheer when they see their planes flying over the city in search of the German positions. The bombing of Hitler's forces is continuous, and their supply lines are cut. General von Manteuffel believes reaching the River Meuse to be impossible, as his troops are immobilized in a radius of 60 kilometers and are not receiving provisions. For their part, von Rundstedt and Guderian fear a heavy Soviet offensive in the east and propose a tactical withdrawal. Hitler responds furiously, "Useless career officers," and refuses to sanction any withdrawal. December 25th. The battle has completed its 10th day. On Christmas Day, the spearhead of the German 2nd Panzer Division has not managed to reach the River Meuse, and its commanders inform their superiors that it is unviable to continue advancing and reach the coast. A furious Hitler orders a massive attack against Bastogne. December 26th. At dusk, a tank unit from Patton's 4th Armored Division is able to break through the encirclement of Bastogne and heads for the city. December 28th. Hounded by events, Hitler stubbornly insists on continuing with his plan. Meeting with the OKW, he insults and humiliates his generals and orders them to counterattack with all available forces. 1945. January 1st. At the start of the year, Himmler and his divisions try to carry out a diversionary maneuver in the Alsace area, but it fails. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army continues its march through Czechoslovakia, while in the West, General de Gaulle asks Eisenhower for permission to occupy Strasbourg, which, historically, had been the cause of territorial disputes with Germany. January 3rd. The Allies launch an offensive on 3 fronts: the 3rd Army in the north, the 1st in the south, and the British 30th Corps in the west. The Germans have used up most of their scarce reserves, and their morale is collapsing, not only because of the situation in which they find themselves, but also due to the news that the Soviets are on the march to the Oder River. January 12th. Field Marshal Model and von Rundstedt rapidly organize an impeccable withdrawal, which manages to save a part of their armies. Meanwhile, Stalin's men are less than 300 kilometers from Berlin. February. As a result of this push by Montgomery's forces, on February the 5th, the Germans lose the city of Colmar and retreat, abandoning their positions on the River Rhine. Meanwhile, Patton's divisions cross the Kiel River, overcoming the Siegfried Line defenses. On both sides, the losses have been appalling. The Allies have suffered 10,300 dead, 47,500 wounded, and 23,500 disappeared. Germany has suffered 16,000 dead, 41,600 wounded, and 27,600 disappeared, plus the loss of 1,600 planes and 640 tanks. The Ardennes has mortally wounded the Third Reich. On the Black Sea, 65 kilometers from Sebastopol, on the Crimean Peninsula, is the city of Yalta, which for a few days becomes the center of the world. Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, together with other heads of state, diplomats, and military experts, analyzed the war from the east to the west in different meetings held in the old palace of Tsar Nicholas II. The Big Three decide to divide up Germany before the end of the war. Unanimously, they decide to reject any offer from Hitler other than unconditional surrender, to forbid the country to rearm, and to dissolve the army. Roosevelt's idea of turning Germany into an agrarian state does not catch on. Stalin agrees to declare war on Japan and to the holding of war crimes trials in Nuremberg once the war is over. The creation of the United Nations is confirmed to substitute the League of Nations, and the Security Council takes shape with the right of veto for permanent members. Once again, the seeds of controversy and tension are sown. But above all, there is a loser, Nazi Germany, which is condemned to disappear. On the 24th of March, the Soviets continued their advance and, overcoming the enemy lines and Kustrin in Poland, they pushed the Germans back towards the capital of the Reich. Stalin announces, "Berlin is ours. We can take it when we want." The Volkssturm, or People's Militia, formed by teenagers and old men, takes to the battlefield to try to halt the march of the Red Army. As far as Hitler is concerned, the Soviets are still Asiatic hordes who should be exterminated like parasites. The closer they get to Berlin, the more the Führer promises victory. Now, in his delirious state of mind, he is convinced that the British and Americans will end up at war. On the 25th, President Roosevelt speaks for the last time in Congress. He tells the American people they must be aware of their responsibility towards other countries and work for understanding and cooperation in order to avoid another international conflict.
By naval and air forces with the unfounding determination of our people.
At the start of April, the Allied armies are in the German Ruhr region, and on the 11th, they arrive at the River Elbe, on the outskirts of Magdeburg, where they halt their march. On April the 12th, Roosevelt dies. Churchill loses no time in trying to persuade the new American president, Harry Truman, to not comply with the Tehran and Yalta agreements. For some time, the British Prime Minister has been considering the unthinkable, a new war against his Soviet allies, aptly called Operation Unthinkable, starting in July. He is convinced that American, British, Canadian, and Polish troops, and what is left of the German army, can reach Stalingrad. He has the support of ultra-conservatives in the United States and some top-level commanders, including General Patton. Churchill wants to end the war at the same place where Hitler began to lose it. But Truman and the majority of the military high command, including Eisenhower, opposed the idea of breaking the agreements made with Stalin and continuing the war in Europe. The Pacific conflict is one very strong reason why the Americans reject Churchill's Operation Unthinkable. Moreover, public opinion in the United States and other Allied countries would not countenance a betrayal of this type, especially given the resonance of Roosevelt's last words. Eisenhower, tired of Churchill's Machiavellian scheming and the internal tensions among his officers, decides to halt the Allied armies on the Elbe, ignoring the outcry of General Patton, who wants to march to Poland and the Ukraine. The Supreme Commander prefers the Soviets to take the casualties that it will cost to reach the heart of the Third Reich. For his part, Stalin and the communist military leadership have information on the British leader's ideas and decide to react with Operation Berlin. It does not matter how many casualties are suffered in the occupation of the city, but what is important is sending a message to the Allies, especially to the imprudent Churchill. These events cause relations between the Eastern and Western Allies to begin to fracture, as Hitler had predicted they would, to such an extent that both Montgomery and Eisenhower refused to participate alongside Zhukov in the victory parade that is to be held once Berlin is taken. On the 13th of April, Vienna is occupied by the Soviets. Those closest to Hitler advise him to abandon Berlin. But while his armies retreat, he becomes more and more removed from reality. Dr. Morrill, his personal doctor, injects him with daily doses of drugs to keep him on his feet. Bitterly angry, stooped, and unable to keep his balance, he can hardly walk a few meters without having to sit down. On the 15th of April, the Allies carry out their final massive bombing raid. The cities of Germany have been reduced to rubble. Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden, Cologne, Frankfurt, Bremen, Mannheim, and many others. There are no objectives left to destroy, but if victory in the skies is complete, the fighting continues on land, though the end of the Third Reich is only a matter of time. Its economy is bankrupt, its army is immobilized, and its industry paralyzed. On the 16th, the final assault on Berlin begins. At 5 in the morning, more than 40,000 big guns and rocket launchers signal the beginning of the end for the German city. "300 tanks, 8,000 planes, and more than 1 million soldiers begin the push that will finish off the empire, which Hitler said would last 1,000 years. On the 20th of April, Hitler celebrates his 56th birthday. The unexpected death of Roosevelt on the 12th of April led him to once more predict the defeat of the Soviets. But in the meantime, the Red Army takes the abandoned headquarters of the Wehrmacht to the south of the city. On the 21st, Zhukov's troops enter the German capital from the east, north, and south, while Goebbels continues to proclaim that the Red Hordes will be thrown back and will never take Berlin. On the 22nd of April, Hitler meets with Jodl and Keitel and tells them, "I will stay in the Reich capital to personally direct its defense. If defeat comes, I will take my own life." The man who promised to govern the world can hardly see and only eats chocolates and cakes. General Jodl suggests to him that General Walter Wenck's 12th Army should abandon the Eastern Front and return to take part in the defense of Berlin, together with Theodor Busse's 9th. Hitler accepts the idea and urgently sends the order. But when Busse receives it, both he and Wenck think that the end is near and decide to escape with their men to the west to surrender to the Americans. Göring sends Hitler a request to be allowed to take control during these last moments, with a view to achieving peace through a negotiated surrender. But Bormann intervenes to try to convince the Führer that the Field Marshal is guilty of treason and should be arrested. At the same time, Himmler tries to reach an agreement with the Allies via Count Bernadotte in the Swedish embassy. On the 24th of April, most of the leaders of the Reich, including Göring, flee to the south. Berlin is surrounded, and Hitler charges General Helmuth Welding with the defense of the city. In the Führer's bunker beneath the Chancellery Garden, life continues in a bizarre way. On the upper floor, secretaries mix with Nazi leaders and their families, who celebrate drunken leaving parties, singing nostalgic Nazi songs. On the lower floor, 15 meters below ground, silence reigns. The 18 private rooms are occupied by Hitler's doctor, Ludwig Stumpfegger, Dr. Morell's substitute, Martin Bormann, the Goebbels family, Hitler's valet Heinz Linge, his SS adjutant Otto Gunsche, his secretaries Gerda Christian and Traudl Junge, and his vegetarian cook Fraulein Manziali. The Führer keeps to his room and only leaves to receive news of developments. He usually sleeps for a few hours during the day and at night meets with his commanders. Against Hitler's wishes, Eva Braun arrives in Berlin, having decided to share his fate. The members of the High Command that have stayed try to persuade both of them to leave the city, while a histrionic Goebbels gives vent to his frustration and fanaticism, shouting, "I don't care how many million civilians there are in this city. If I see one white flag, I will blow up all the houses around it, along with their inhabitants." Hitler's face and eyes reflect his complete and utter exhaustion. On the 25th of April, when American and Soviet troops meet on the River Elbe, Berlin is hardly capable of putting up any resistance. The Soviets are only a few kilometers from the bunker, and the shells from their artillery are destroying the Chancellery. On the 28th of April, Himmler's adjutant, Otto Fegelein, informs Hitler of his superior's betrayal. Furious, the Nazi leader orders Himmler's arrest and the execution of Fegelein, Eva Braun's brother-in-law, on the charge of treason. Early on the following morning, he marries Eva Braun and dictates his last will and testament, in which he names Dönitz his successor and declares himself innocent of any warlike intention, stating, "I die with a happy heart, aware of the immeasurable deeds and achievements of our soldiers at the front. That from the bottom of my heart, I express my thanks to you all, is just as self-evident as my wish that you should, because of that, on no account give up the struggle but rather continue it against the enemies of the fatherland. In the early morning of the 30th, he orders his dog Blondie to be put to death. Shortly afterwards, he is told that the Soviets are only a few meters from the chancellery. His personal adjunct orders 200 liters of gasoline to be brought. Hitler seeks out his wife, Eva Braun, takes his leave from those still in the bunker, and retires to his room. She takes a cyanide capsule, and the Nazi dictator shoots himself in the head. Following orders, Heinz Ling and Martin Bormann open the door and find them on the sofa in a pool of blood. It was 3:30 Monday, the 30th of April, 1945. On the night of the 1st of May, Magda Goebbels poisons her 6 children. Then she is killed by her husband, who commits suicide after asking an SS officer called Schwagerman to incinerate their bodies. When Hitler began his career, Goebbels predicted, "Once we have power, we will never lose it. They will have to go over our dead bodies." He was right. On the 2nd of May, while German radio announces the death of the dictator, 5,000 men die defending the Reichstag in Berlin before it is taken by the Red Army. General Helmuth Wiedling surrenders and hands over the city to the Allied forces. Next day, Karl Donitz sends Admiral Friedeberg to Montgomery's headquarters to discuss the terms of capitulation.
The German delegation will now sign this paper, and they will sign in order of seniority, and General Admiral von Friedeberg will sign first. Now, General Kinsel will sign next. Now, I will sign the instrument on behalf of the Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower.
On the 7th of May, Alfred Jodl, acting in the name of the German government, signs the surrender of all troops. Churchill, one of the great intriguers of the 20th century, has not caused the Third World War. For Stalin, the victory flag over the Reichstag symbolizes the destruction of the enemy in his own den, an enemy that caused so much suffering to the Soviet people and, in the words of Eisenhower, to the whole of humanity. In Europe, the most terrible nightmare of the continent's history has ended. Now begins again an era of reconstruction on the foundations of a bitter experience. It is spring 1945.